Okay, someone needs to take a picture of this, okay? This is like kabhi na hua, kabhi na hoga kind of thing, right? I am so delighted. So let's dive right in. I had asked you, and requested, I don't know how many of you were able to do that, but I would love for you to share a few lines from the book that struck you as being personally relevant, okay? So go ahead and tell a little anecdote or an incident from your own leadership experience, which connects to the lines you're going to share, okay? So who wants to go first?
I could do that. All right.
Yes, Kavita.
Can
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. The books. So Raj and Nilima, quite honestly, when I was reading the book over the weekend, it almost felt like you had me in mind when you was writing the book. Every element, quite honestly, I relate to. But that one particular element that I connect to very deeply is that of flexing, creating flexibility. And I would like to read an extract from that chapter, which quite honestly encapsulates the essence of flexibility, if I may.
Please.
And it says, a conscious leader is flexible. We define flexibility as the capacity to switch modes seamlessly and to bend without breaking as the situation or the context requires. Examples of flexibility abound in nature. The bamboo tree gets its resilience from its ability to be flexible. It bends but does not break in the wind. A chameleon knows how to change colors to adapt to its context in order to survive and thrive. Leaders also need to be able to bend but not break, adapting to circumstances in a principled way without sacrificing their core values. And, as all of us who are part of the corporate world, it is a dynamic world that we live in, calls upon organizations to be agile and respond almost immediately to every change that happens. As leaders, therefore, it requires us to not only inform our people of the need for change and respond to it, but also create a guiding coalition amongst the organization, amongst the people, and to be able to empower people to adapt to that change. And believe me, being in a leadership role, it's not always easy. And I have my superpower sitting right here to bring about that change. It's really because it calls upon aligning multiple divergent vectors and divergent mindsets. And that's where really no one leadership style ever works. And it's really about flexing your behaviors to respond to those situations. And as very beautifully described in your book, and you just mentioned, it's about transcending between the masculine and the feminine, which you call as energies, right? It's balancing between the two energies, between the feminine. And I think one very simple yet very powerful example that you've made in your book is that no bird can fly with just one wing. Yes. And truly, to be able to be a balanced leader, you have to be able to nurture that one self which has been deficient for some time to be a successful leader.
Thank you, Kavita.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to move to, I'm going to ask Sanjeev. Sanjeev is someone I've known for many years, and when I was thinking of a conscious leader and a man, and he just so naturally fits that bill. Now, no pressure, Sanjeev, but I have seen you build Karu, and I've seen the way you not just create the products which are absolutely sublime, art for everyday living, but I've also seen how you went about doing it. I've seen the culture you've created in your team. It's just, and looking back, I realize this is what you were doing. You were being very whole and very conscious leaders. Want to talk about that?
It's a pleasure to be here, and what Raj and Nilima spoke of carries a lot of depth in what is required in today's world. I come from a world of design. I'm an architect, so I'll speak from that angle. I'll relate it to what you were saying by connecting with the 5 elements that you were talking of. Now, there are 2-3 approaches to that, starting from my own body, which emanates from these 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space. So, as an architect, when I look at form, all designs are form-oriented, but what is incredible about form is that it has latent in it what is called a space. Because all these 4 elements out of 5, earth, water, air, and fire, they can be broken down. And when they are broken down, only space remains. So you've also mentioned in your book that it's a binding factor. To me, it is that plus what it does, space mirrors. And in our own traditional philosophies, the relationship between Radha and Krishna has been so beautifully depicted, where whatever Krishna does or Shiva does, Parvati and Radha just mirrors that. Without that role, Shiv and Krishna would be completely meaningless. So as an architect, when I design with form, I have to be extremely conscious of space. So what space does is that it provides that mirror. And if the form is not conscious of that, then it becomes distorted. And when you end up realizing that from space comes time. So incredibly, what I realize while designing is that the definition of time is, the only way I can define is that in-between period, which can be sensed only by patience. Now, I'm talking about space, I'm talking about time. In terms of patience, both are feminine. So in this world, these 2 things, as an architect, I think if we contemplate on that, if we give it thought, then as an approach to live, to work, it becomes a contemplative approach, which the world, I think, has completely forgotten. And it would be wonderful to do that. I don't know much about business, but from the design perspective, this is what I had to share.
Thank you, Sanjeev. I love, you say I don't, thank you. You say you don't know much about business, but he really exemplifies social entrepreneurship. They revive threatened craft arts, and they do the most brilliant work with that, and they bring them to markets. So you are the social entrepreneur, you're a conscious capitalist. You are now officially so, okay? May I invite Deepika Jindal to share whatever came at, you had the book, I know it was a bit rushed for you, but we had a conversation, and it was so aligned, so why don't you share?
Yeah, I think this book is something which each one should read, because I think it's got so much value. Because when I read the book, I haven't finished the book, but whatever I've read, I really resonated with each and every chapter. And when I started reading the book, there was one which you've already mentioned, was the heroic journey. And it's a live experience that I've personally gone through in my own life, and I've gone through this. And when I read it, I said, oh God, is this like something which is experienced by others as well? So I'd like to read this. It's how you summarize the heroic journey in your book. The journey begins with a crisis in your life, a crisis that shakes you out of normalcy. The crisis throws you into a different world where you experience pain, suffering, even trauma. As you're coming to grips with this new reality, you must confront your worst fear. There comes a moment when it's just you and your shadow, your greatest fear. And of course, then you reach your real true self. And I would like to begin from my journey, very short. I was a housewife till almost 40 years of my life. I started working when I was about 40. I had no business. I was a normal housewife. I had no business training. I had no idea what was business, what is design, what is stainless steel. But I got into this as a passion. And I made a lot of mistakes while doing this business. And I realized I came to a point in my journey where it was almost like shutting the doors. And all this time, it was my identity. My business was me. So when I came to a situation when my husband said that there's no money in your company and you need to shut it, it was like facing myself. I said, I've actually lost everything. I mean, I'm a failure. What will people think of me? How am I going to be? How am I going to live? Everything is going down. And I kept, for months, I kept circling my garden, thinking about myself and how it's going to completely destroy my life. My identity was my work. And my biggest fear was that how can I fail? I mean, this was one opportunity in my life, which I come from a family where all have achieved so much. I'm going to destroy everything by not even achieving a bit of what I've done. And so it was a real traumatic time. And a day came in my life when I met somebody with my husband, and that person said, I'm sorry, I don't think this business is for you. So would you let go of it? And I wasn't ready to say no, or, I was always thinking, no, this is the best thing I can do, and how can I say no, I'm not going to do it. But I couldn't even lie. So my husband was sitting next to me, and I said, okay, I let it go. If it's not for me, I let it go. And I remember when I left that room, my husband said, see, I told you this is not working, so you need to leave it to me to decide what to do. I said, fine, it's up to you. Take a call and do what you think is best for me. And I think that was the day when I accepted all my failures. With all what I did, my life changed. What Ardenox is today is all because I was ready to face that crisis, and it's changed me as a human being, it's changed me as a business leader, it's changed me as the way I run my company. It's just changed. I mean, I couldn't believe it that company which was closing has suddenly changed. And now I have a profit of, a turnover of 250 crores. So from zero, within 4 years, if things can change, I think anybody can do it. And I really thank you for that.
Deepika, I was so delighted when we spoke and what you just shared, really, from the bottom of my heart. I'm so grateful that you were vulnerable in this space and, told it as it is. We often think, people come from a lot of money, what problems could they have? But I like Kabir's doha, right? कि धरती और आसमान के चक्की के बीच साबुत बचा ना कोई, right? Each one of us have to go through our grinding, and it's Raja Hoya Rank. It's got nothing to do with how much money you have, or, we all have to make that journey and face what we have to face. So thank you, Deepika. Thank you. Santosh, now since you're this amazing thinker, and I knew I needed you on this panel because I'd read one of your pieces in City City Bang Bang, where you were saying this new age that is upon us, the digital age. And we're going to all these young entrepreneurs, the millennials, they are reimagining the world. And at that moment I said, you know what? Every society, every culture needs a founding myth, a story that they can believe and which can galvanize them. And I said, if we're reimagining everything, it's such an opportunity to find the right myth that will be sustainable for this planet and this humanity. So that's what I want to ask you about. What is the message in the book? How do you relate to that, about the world needing a new mythology, and at this time with the digital age upon us, and what would you like to share?
I think what what the book says, also I think what you shared with us in those couple of slides, I think the fact that, behind the seeming oppositions of our times, behind the fact that there are, you talked about polarity, but we also see an enormous amount of polarization.
Yes.
And the fact that one of the missing links is one of the words that you used up in your slide, is the idea of empathy and the ability to see other perspectives and other points of view, and to understand that both of them belong to a larger system. So in a sense, they are part of the whole. The idea that oppositional energies are intrinsic and they kind of feed each other and they belong to a larger whole is something that I think is a powerful idea that I find that, for instance, you know, in the political domain, the ability to kind of look upon the other as the absolute opposite of from where you come from, and to imagine therefore the most horrible things about the other side. How do you rise? I think in the world that we are moving into, I think from a time when, you know, division, separation, you know, how are we different from each other being the operating kind of an idea. If you go back in time, I mean, you know, Marshall McLuhan says that, you know, every time dominant media of the time changes, everything changes. And I find it interesting that you know, you go back to a time when print is dominant. We normally don't think of it like that, but print is hierarchical.
Right.
What print does is, it's interesting that there is an editor who gives an opinion and there are other people who follow. When we write something, we always write something retrospectively, unless we are stenographers. It's interesting. When we write sequence, logic, order, these get privileged.
Right.
The world takes on a masculine kind of an orientation, the idea of controlling, the idea of mastery. These are intrinsic to the notion of print-based cultures. The digital world is a different kind of an imagination, where what we are emphasizing is collaboration. What you are emphasizing today is the fact that everyone has a voice. If there was one editor yesterday, everybody is an editor today.
Right.
Everyone has the microphone. It's an amazing change that we are seeing, where there is genuinely a certain democratization that we've never seen before. Right. There is the ability of the world to find answers using new modes of thinking that I think are quite, and we are seeing this. The reason why in business there is this, you know, the idea of conscious capitalism and the idea that we see of challenging the old order, where things were reductive. I mean, I have done an MBA, and the MBA is essentially about breaking up the world into component parts. It is to imagine the world as separate pieces and trying to maximize. You look for efficiency. You know, those were the kind of words that were dominant then. Today, you move from the idea of managing, which is a constraint-based view of the world. How do I manage? How do I cope? To, you know, the world of imagination and creation. How do I create? How do I imagine a new kind of a possibility? I think that's a fundamental shift that the world is seeing. And I think the coming together of the digital, the coming together of the fact that there are young, new energies, the fact that the source of wealth today is imagination. Yeah. Not infrastructure, not legacy, but imagination. I think that's a powerful idea.
Thank you. And for me, everything, all the language you use, I would simply replace it in my language as Shakti, right? Shakti is inclusive, Shakti is creative, Shakti is that imagination, the rasa, variety of life. So the ascendant feminine. Raj, do you want to just talk about the ascendant feminine since?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of evidence that's coming out that shows the rise of feminine values. If you think about the last few centuries, the 19th century was about the end of slavery. The United States had a civil war. Many other countries ended slavery in that time. The 20th century was about the end of totalitarianism, communist dictatorships, right, around the world. The 21st century will be about, we believe, the end of the sidelining and the repressing of the feminine, not just of women, but feminine energy, feminine values generally. And a lot of research is starting to show this shift in a dramatic way. So there was a book called The Athena Doctrine, which was subtitled How Women and Men Who Think Like Them Will Rule the Future or Will Lead the Future. And it was based on empirical work of 60,000 interviews around the world, 30,000 people were asked to define masculine and feminine, because it is a matter of language sometimes, right? What we label as masculine and feminine. And then 30,000 people were asked to define the qualities of good leadership. They were asked to define what does it mean to be ethical and moral. What are the requirements for happiness? And in each case, what they found was that which is considered feminine correlates very strongly with that which is considered good leadership. It also correlates with greater happiness, and it also correlates with greater morality. So we're starting to see now, after countless millennia of domination of one side of the human psyche, right, the masculine side, domination, aggression, competition, winning results at all costs, that has led to a huge amount of material progress, but also extraordinary amounts of suffering and pain in the world. And it doesn't have to be that way. And there's lots of indications that we are coming out of that. If you look at human history just in the last 100 years, until 1946, European nations fought 1,200 wars in 600 years. There were 2 wars every year on average. Since 1946, there have been 0. Right? So we are moving away from that world. We're actually living in the most peaceful time in human history. Fewer people are experiencing violence, murder, death by terrorists or death in wars. It's down by 95, even 99%. We don't realize that because of the headlines. As Bill Clinton said, don't mistake the headlines for the trend lines. The trend lines are generally moving towards greater peace, greater cooperation, right? All of the kinds of things that we now associate, or we traditionally associate with the rise of more feminine values. So I think there's a great deal to be optimistic about. This is the century in which women finally are able to step up to their role as equal partners, obviously, in the human journey. And a big part of that is access to education. Women outnumber men in college everywhere in the world except South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. It's 58% across all industrialized countries. 58% of college students are women, and they get higher grades and they graduate at a higher rate. So every white-collar profession will be dominated by women in years to come. We'll see women in leadership in every realm. It's already happened in multiple fields. And when you have strength in numbers, we get away from the old idea. The only women who could succeed in the old world, if you go back and look at 20 years ago, we had Margaret Thatcher, who was the Iron Lady, and Golda Meir, who was the original Iron Lady, and Indira Gandhi here in India, who was known as the only man in her cabinet, right? The only way women succeeded was by being more aggressive, more dominating, more ruthless than men. And today, when we have more women coming up, they are able to actually lead authentically. And also men have permission to bring out that side. One of the beautiful phrases that I learned from Nilima is, vulnerability is not a liability, it's an ability. And we suppress vulnerability so dramatically, right? We teach little boys, you cannot cry, right? I mean, man up. It's a very harmful thing that we can tell little people, not to actually be human, to be able to express emotion. So I think we're really moving forward into a time when all of these human qualities will be able to be expressed by men and women alike. And I think it's a wonderful time.
Thank you, Raj. Perfect. Perfect.
So my question is that looking at these quadrants, when we talk about the concept of power, for me, something that strikes my mind is also the concept of power struggles, which has happened and transcended through years. So why is it then when a woman chooses to access her masculine power within the quadrant, that it is always pitted or seen threatening against the masculine power of a man? And where do you think it ceases to exist today, and how would it carve its own space in the future without having to constantly be compared?
Good question. So there is something called the patriarchy, right? It's been around for over 5,000 years. And what that basically means is one gender, that's the male, is considered the dominant, and the other, with the other polarity, which is female, is in subordination to that. So it's basically a dominant, subordinate, socialized model we've been a part of. So therefore, where is the power? The power is with the dominant. And so therefore it's power over. The dominator has power over the subordinate. And that's how it's been socialized. So when everyone needs power to function, so even women realize if they want to feel empowered, they need to become like a man. And therefore, they claim all those masculine qualities. But the bird of humanity needs to fly on both wings. Otherwise, we've been going around in circles. That's one of the stories in there.
Just one question. Why would you say, though, that whenever, like, you look at a woman, you always say, I mean, nowadays you see movies like a movie called Key and Kaa, for instance, right, where you have a house husband and you have a woman going in the workplace.
Yes.
Why would you say that feminism and women accessing both powers
Yes.
is considered to be something which is substituting gender roles and is not something that's a humanitarian thing that women need to do?
I think, Pallavi, you're going to have to find your own answers. These are questions we are all struggling with. We are reinventing relationship, we are reinventing gender roles, and each of us is going to get to a place of freedom to choose whatever we want to be. And then negotiate relationships we are going to be in where it can be win-win, right? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So before I ask my question, I'd first like to thank Raj and Nilima ji for creating this wonderful narrative that's very necessary in today's world. I think everyone will be well aware that a theme of today's progressive dialogues are around equality, around feminism, around the need for women in the workplace. But one element that is grossly missing in a lot of these dialogues I've found is this spiritual quality and the element of embracing the divine aspect of being the divine aspect of femininity, rather than, as we just discussed, being overtly masculine, whether that's for a man or a woman as well. So my question is around the theme that Raj Sisodia mentioned towards the beginning of the conversation, and that's India's role in being a thought leader, a role model of Shakti leadership for the whole planet. I've had the privilege of spending some time in the United States, and I've seen a country where all human beings have a house, have a car, have a TV, have food, have all the things that human beings are educated to crave and work towards and work for. And at the same time, I've seen a society that is utterly fragmented, broken, neurotic. It's a culture that requires drugs to wake up, drugs to focus, drugs to sleep, and alcohol and more drugs on the weekend to escape the misery of life. And having lived in that society, I can say with clarity that America has no right being the world's role model. And that it would be wrong for a young nation like ours, to say that our desire is to be like America. And so my question to everyone on stage, as exemplars of Shakti leaders, what does India need to do as a nation to rightfully play this role of role model for the whole planet, in terms of being a society that is oriented towards conscious growth, the conscious evolution of human beings, and building businesses, societies, cities that have those aspects of Shakti leadership: wholeness, congruence, presence, etc. Thank you.
Wow, brilliant question. By the way, before we turn it to the panel, I have to say this is my student from Babson College, who graduated last year. He was in my Conscious Capitalism class, an extraordinary young entrepreneur who's starting this kind of a business right now here. And I do think as young people like yourselves, who have that depth of understanding, right, of what is special and what is valuable that we have to offer, and if we can figure out how to harness that and how to embody that, and then take it to the world, and I think that's a great contribution that we can make. But I would love to invite you all to.
I'd like to answer this because I think first and foremost, because Ardenox is a company which started in India to promote Indian design, Indian everything. I mean, I've never worked with many international designers because I realized that there's a huge potential in our country and we need to give everybody an opportunity to realize what they can do. And for me, in my journey, the book that I recommend each and everybody to go through is the Bhagavad Gita, because that book teaches you everything that India is all about. And I'm sorry to say, but the younger generation I won't generalize, but a lot of them who've studied abroad and have come back don't value their own culture and tradition in the true sense. And they need to realize that the real essence of India is in It's its values and traditions that have been, it has to be explained properly. You see, there are many interpretations and people think it as to be very ritualistic and very wrong. But I think that's how people have made what we have. And we need to change that in the minds. And I think, especially when children are much older, you can't change their mindset, but you can be an example. And when you change yourself and you start valuing yourself and you know what you're doing is the best in a conscious, like as a whole, I think people around you will start seeing that change and would like to be what you have become. So in my life, that's how I'm leaving, because maybe the way I brought up my kids, they have their own impressions and ideas, and I can't change those because my experience from what I've learned in all these years, I may not have been able to imbibe that in my kids in the proper way, which I feel that now by understanding my true self and understanding what is the most valuable thing about me and changing my own mindset and my own ways of how I look at things and how I address things, I will be able to change my inner circle. And that's the only way you can do it, because you cannot change others. So I think the best way is to change yourself and value what you have first before you think of changing others around you.
Thank you. Yes.
Can I add something to
Sure.
what he was asking and what she said? It was a great question.
Yeah.
I hope I'm able to explain this properly. I believe every place has its potential, wherever you are, whether it's American or Indian, it doesn't matter. The greatest challenge in India that we are facing right now is that we don't relate to our environment or what is around deeply. So what Raj and Nilima were earlier talking of, that whether it's 4,000 years back or 2,500 years back, what we have in our hand, if we look at that, you would find all these answers. So on one hand, you have the concept of non-duality, which is, you know that there is a feminine and there is a masculine, and yet you're aware that you don't have a choice. You cannot separate them, they are together. So this whole thing that you were talking about from the US, the approach comes from an analytical bent of mind which sees this as different. If you don't see this as different, if you see them as together, then there is no problem at all. This has to be simultaneous. So, which makes it more contemplative. So there is an analytical approach which could be from the US and a meditative approach which could be from a place like India. You need to have both approaches. So there is a balance which really works. And India can talk about spiritualism, you asked, so it is this realm of non-duality where what Nilima is talking about in her book, Love, Compassion, would go a long way. You cannot do it by analyzing, because science has analyzed enough. It is still groping in the dark. Higgs boson particle is one example. So if they can't find anything at the end of it, then only by contemplation you can realize such things. And from there, everything will emanate, including business.
Beautiful. Thank you.